delighted to be joined by my next guest, Tony Sutton. Welcome to Talk Drive. How are you, Tone?
Well, welcome, Jeremy. Yeah, I'm fine. Obviously, this is going to be very hard to talk to you about, but I owe it to the girls who's been abused and the girls that are being abused.
Yours is a story that needs sharing, and it will be difficult. It'll be difficult for you, and it'll be difficult for some people to hear. It's the story of your daughter, Tessa. I did this for a long time. No hurry. I'm not interested in ad breaks. You can talk for an hour. I'll fight anybody. You take your time. You tell it in your own words, pal.
Well, it all started when Tessa went to secondary school. Tessa was a good kid. She's not from a broken family or anything like that. And she befriended everybody. She trusted everybody. I was married to a black woman, so Tessa was brought up with no racist bones in her body whatsoever. So it's not a case of anything like that. And I'd just split up with her mother, and she was a bit lost. And like I say, she trusted everybody. So she went to school, and it all started off fairly innocently. And it started off with her being offered and dared to have a cigarette, like it does with a lot of kids. You know, we dare you to have a cigarette, and her wanting to be part of the group and part of a gang. And the school she went with was very, very mixed. It was sort of 50-50 white, English, and you know, obviously 50% Asian. And Tessa soon latched on to some Asian lads in her class. These were the ones that were giving her the cigarettes. Now, we didn't really know much about it. And to be honest, she was a good kid, so you wouldn't have suspected it. She wasn't one of them kids where you had to keep watching her and telling her off for anything. In fact, she was the other way, to be truthful. And so it gradually went on and it moved on to vodka. And we got the same story that probably a lot of parents have had, whereby she'd said to us, "Can I stop at such a body's tonight?" And you knew the parents, and to be honest, one of the parents who who were her friend was a police sergeant. So you obviously trusted your daughter to go and stop at her friends, and her friend would probably get the same. Can I go and stop at at such a body's, at Tessa's house? And again, they knew us. So you trusted that's what was happening. Anyway, it turned out the first thing we really knew that anything was going wrong is when we got a phone call in the middle of the night. Now, I'd split up with her mum by now, so I was at my house and mum was at her. And it was late on in the middle of the night. I can't remember exactly what month, but I know it was winter time and like October, November sort of time. And we got a phone call off Blackburn Royal Hospital saying that Tessa was up at the hospital, that she'd been found in a tent with a friend, drunk, with hypothermia. So we went both rushed up to the hospital, and she was there and whatever. And they said if this lady, it was a lady walking a dog who found her, said if they hadn't found her then, she'd have been dead by the morning. Anyway, so we didn't even again then read too much into it being grooming. We just thought it's kids and so she eventually started self-harming, and her arms looked like a barcode. By the time she'd finished, her arms would look like she'd just been literally through a supermarket barcoding machine. So it went from it started, like I say, quite innocently, really, with the odd cigarette and a dare to vodka. Then it moved on to other things, and eventually, well, I say eventually, very quickly, to be honest, before me and her mum really knew much was going wrong, she was actually onto Class A drugs. And she'd been weaned onto Class A drugs, in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, but with the sole intention of getting her hooked so that she would trade herself for a fix. I'm sure this is quite common of a lot of these girls who's on the street, that they're not there by choice, they're there because something like that has happened to them. And so the problem is the problem is that by being such an addict, that when someone's after consent for sex, then that she will be giving them consent for sex in exchange for a fix.
Yeah.
So to me, it is still rape by anybody's way of reckoning.
It's grooming, isn't it? It's getting her to a position where she will
obviously
do what
by
they want.
giving consent, you're in that middle ground before we where the police are concerned that well, she's consented. Well, she's consented because in a way she's sort of like been blackmailed into like getting the substance in exchange for whatever. So it's not consent. Well, it is, but it isn't. If that makes a bit of sense. Anyway, so you couldn't, by this time, me and her mum couldn't do anything. She'd be sneaking out in the middle of the night. You'd have had to chain her up, because you will literally lock all the doors, go to bed. Bear in mind we both work full time. You go to bed, and before you knew it, she'd have snuck out in the middle of the night, and you wouldn't even know that she'd been out in the middle of the night. So she got to a point where I had a go at my house trying to sort her out, and being up half of the night trying to keep a watch on her. And then when she was back at her mum's, we had the same thing there, where she was sneaking out and what have you, and meeting people and what have you. And so she was. So this went on. She'd only be about 18 probably by then. She wasn't. She was still very, very young, and eventually she was passed around like a piece of meat in exchange for sex, basically, in exchange for a substance or anything. Tessa would literally drink. I was told to take her to the hospital just before she died. I was told to take her to the hospital up at Blackburn, and I was waiting that long in A&E, even though they knew she had problems, and I told them she had problems, that she was drinking hand sanitizer. This is how bad she had got. She would literally, she was beyond anybody's thing. So I sort of like begged the social workers to send her to rehab and keep her there. Anyway, so she, like I say, she'd ended up on Class A drugs and all.
What drugs? Just for one minute. What drugs?
Well, cocaine and basically
heroin.
No, I don't think she did heroin. I think it was cocaine.
Did she go to rehab, Tony?
Did she what? Sorry.
Did she go to rehab?
No, she didn't. They said she didn't want to go to rehab and she had capacity. Now, I questioned, how can somebody have capacity that slashes herself to pieces and ends up in an intensive care unit? Because it wasn't her first time in intensive care unit. She had come out of intensive care unit and been moved to a ward. I'd pre-warned the hospital not to let anybody see her other than me and her mum, because they'd be fetching her things in, not to give her a clothes, not to give her a phone, not to give her any money. And because, as I says, the first chance you do, she'll do a runner. So that's what basically she moved off the intensive care unit on one side of Blackburn Hospital. It has two intensive care units, to a ward. And like I say, I pre-warned them about what would happen, and we had alternative days at going to visit. So one day, I'd go, and then the next day, Mum would go. And she was as right as she was ever going to be. To be honest, she weren't right, but she walked around hospital. She'd be allowed to walk around hospital and what have you. And anyway, so it was my turn to go, and I rang up and I said, right, I'm coming. I'm going up to see Tessa. And they said, don't bother. This is her boyfriend. Said, don't bother. She's here. And I said, what do you mean she's here? So she'd signed herself out and done a runner from Blackburn Hospital. So about 2 days after that, her health visitor rang me and said, she's complaining of stomach problems, stomach thing. Now, bear in mind, she'd just come off intensive care with liver problems, with substance abuse, and a racing heart. And so he said, if you take her up to hospital, Tony. I says, well, I'll struggle to get it there, I says, but I'll try. So she says, well, if you do that, I'll ring hospital, tell them that you're coming. I says, right, fair enough. So I went to rang Tessa, and I sort of like badgered her into going. It took me a while to get her to agree to go. And I went, and I said to the receptionist, I fetched her health visitors, told me to bring her up and all this lot, and supposed to have rung you to tell you I'm coming. She says, oh, no one's rung us. She says, so we waited in this waiting room, and the hospital the waiting room were full. They had it empty. It took about 4 hours to empty. Tess had cleared off into the women's toilets by then, and was ages, to a point where I went to tell one of the sisters that, I says, my daughter's in that woman's toilet. I says, I can't go in. I says, but she's could be doing anything. She could be slashing her wrists or taking whatever. Anyway, it took them about half an hour to go around to see her, and I had to go and ask him again. And just as they were going to send someone in, she came out. And so we eventually got to see this doctor, and I walked into this doctor, and bear in mind she'd discharged herself about 2 days earlier, and it was like she were being punished. And I said to this doctor, I said, I brought her here, she's complaining of her stomach aches and whatever, she's discharged herself from hospital. And he turned around to me as flippant as they could, and said to me, well, what do you expect me to do? And it was as flippant as that. I've never heard anything from a doctor as so sort of like disgusting in my life. I'm thinking, I thought, well, I couldn't actually. So straight away I tried to ring this health worker, and she told me she'd have her phone on all night if I had any problems. And it literally just went to an engage. Well, it just rang through, just kept ringing through, and it made me look absolutely stupid. So eventually this doctor says to us, go back in there and we'll do some bloods. So we went back in there, and we were ages. By this time, Tessa was climbing up the wall. I'd nearly have to sit on her. Bear in mind, she's, like I say, she's massive into substance abuse by now, and drinking the hand sanitizer. And so I went to the counter. I said, look, you can't keep her here much longer. I'm nearly having to sit on her to keep her here and beg her to stay. We've been there about 5-6 hours by now. And so this receptionist said, well, go through them 2 doors there, Tony, and there'll be a woman with a nurse with a dark blue uniform. Just tell them. And I went through these doors, came back, and Tess had done a runner and was outside smoking a joint. So that was the end of that. I couldn't get her back in. 2 or 3 days after that, she was still complaining of stomach ache. And like I say, so her mum took her to a GP. Her GP sent her straight up to Blackburn Hospital and rang Blackburn Hospital. They put her straight on the other ICU unit and put her in an induced coma. And then every time I rung up, she seemed to be like no better. She'd just come off one about 2 weeks early. So you were expecting the same, that eventually she'll come round. And then they said to me, oh, I rang them up when it weren't my day to go, when it was my wife's day to go. And they said, oh, we're reducing her sedation. And I'm thinking, oh, they're bringing her around, because I don't know whether you know or not, they bring them around very, very slowly, because they bring them around too fast, it does a lot of damage.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking they're bringing her around very, very slowly. And she'll be, next time I go, her eyes will be open and everything, and that, you know what I mean? She might be groggy, but she'll be awake and what have it. Anyway, it were my wife's turn to go the next day. I'd gone out and actually enjoying myself, because I thought, well, it's not my day, there's nothing I can do. And then I got a phone call at 4:30 saying they're turning the machines off. And I thought, they're turning the machines off because they don't need them anymore. No, they're turning the machines off because they give up on her. So I went up to hospital, grabbed her brother and her sister and her grandma and my brother, my younger brother, and sorry,
You're
and
right.
Basically the consultant came in and talked to you, and it was without any compassion whatsoever. It was like he was talking about something wrong with a car. It wasn't like he was talking about a human being. And basically, I said to him, I said, well, if she's got like liver failure and all this lot, why can't you do something about it? You did it for Jimmy Grave, you did it for George Best, you did it for all these, liver dialysis machines and all this. So, oh no, they said we can't do that, and that was basically it. So this was the 9th of November. Now, her sister's birthday is on the 12th. Sorry.
You're good.
And I said, I don't want, if you're going to do it, I don't want my daughter dying on my other daughter's birthday. And this has all come about through grooming. And all these people who think that it's not going on, or they think it's a very trivial thing and not, not so widespread, they need to get out into the real world, because I know at least 2 northern towns where it's going on.
Tony, there's many things if I can jump in, there's many things I want to ask you, and anything that you don't want to answer, that's fine.
No, sure, you carry on.
You claim that Tessa was exploited by a group of Asian boys and men. Hear me out 1 second, please. One of the big things that's come out in the last few days, and there has been a lack of willing to be able to say that certain members of those communities have been responsible. Over the years, people who have said it, Nigel Farage said it in 2014, was called a racist. We've been talking about it at this station. It now has come out that, in fact, a majority of the I call it the raping of these young white girls, has been carried out by Muslim men, British Pakistani men and illegal migrants. How do you know or believe that Tessa was, we talked about the drugs, we talked about the downward spiral, how do you know she was exploited by a group of Asian boys and men?
Because I know, because I've seen some of I've actually met some of these. Well, I've not met them. I've seen her with some of these people, and I also she had a care worker who he was like an unofficial care worker, like a shadowing sort of person that was given to her, and he was Asian, and he ended up she's ended up expecting by him.
So you've got a half Asian granddaughter?
Yeah.
Are you bringing that child up?
My son is. My son is.
And that's with the Asian volunteer support worker that your daughter, who was traumatised, had a child with?
Yeah.
What do you say to people who think that this is, how do I put this, an attack on certain communities when people are suddenly saying...
There'll be people... There will be English white blokes who do groom kids, but they tend to be loners. These are like, if you will, organised groups whereby they're that organised. They will find somebody like that and pass them around inside the group, rather than, like, if you will, your average old-fashioned groomer from when we were kids, from Charlie the cat and all that.
From a father's point of view, take a breath and talk to me, a father of 6. What, you have to be so careful when you do this, but you talked about how hopeless it was, how you couldn't keep her in. You talked about how you felt like the system had failed. You weren't getting the answers, you weren't getting the support. You're trying to hold down a job and do all this stuff.
We weren't getting any support, no.
What's that like as a father, realising that your daughter's slipping away from you because she's being groomed?
I promise it's awful, to try and keep it together and not actually lose it, and not how can you put yourself in a situation where you end up in prison, because your first reaction as a father is to go out and protect your daughter. I'm sure anybody who's had their daughter sexually assaulted, the first instinct, especially a bloke's instinct, is to go out and find these people and take the law into your own hands. And I don't think I'd be doing these. It's not a case of being scared of it. I'm more scared of me. And I think I'd do more good by well, I hope I'm doing more good by coming on here and going onto that National Crime Agency and the like and doing it through the proper channels. I'm hoping
Completely agree.
that we can trust these people to not just tick a few boxes and say, right, we've done that, it's over, nothing's happened, and it's not as bad as everybody said and all the rest of it.
So whilst you are happy is the wrong word, but you're delighted that there is now going to be a national inquiry. Your daughter, a victim, your family torn apart by what you believed was grooming by a group of Asian boys and men that led a nice, successful young girl who was very trusting. Yes, her parents' marriage had broken
My
down.
daughter had a degree in medicine. She wasn't thick or anything. She's all these people. They come on. They come on, and I've heard them. I've watched everything there is on BBC, on everything there is, and they're all on about historic sex abuse, grooming gangs. Historic? It isn't historic. They all talk about in the past tense. It's been going on for years. Don't get me wrong, but it's current. It's current. It's as widespread and current.
What does it say about our society that if it's true, Leader in the Sun on Tuesday said, this has been systematic, institutionalised cover-ups?
It is. I think it's. I honestly do. I honestly do think it's been covered up. I think a lot of people, especially MPs and such like, and social workers and one, I think they're that scared of going too far to the other side to be seen as racist that they don't, or losing votes or whatever the case may be, or not getting a promotion or what have you, that they have covered all this up. You know, I mean,
do me a favour. Do me a favour. You're brilliant, mate. And I listen. What do I do? What do I know? I know that I'd be in prison if what had happened to you happened to me. And I think about what happened to that girl, and I think about men who think it's right to ply girls with drugs and have their wicked way. Disgusting, vile. Hope they get locked up. As a father, for people, just hear me out. For people who perhaps don't understand what this does, when you had to say goodbye to Tessa that day, what does that do to you? What does that do to you?
Oh God, there's no words can describe that. It took. I was up all night the night before. As soon as I heard, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't mention her name or have anybody mention her name for about 6 months afterwards. I'd be like I am now. And to give up work, I couldn't work. You haven't been there till that happened. Anybody who's ever took a dog or a cat to have it put down, it's 10 times that. And I have nightmares to this day, and all I see in the middle of the night, I was up this morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, all you see is your daughter lying on that bed, surrounded by machines, keeping her alive.
Who do you blame for her death?
I blame everybody, including myself for not noticing it early enough and giving her too much freedom. I blame the schools, the social services, the NHS. I mean, I said I promised that woman. Well, I asked that woman and whatever. The woman who told me to take her up to the hospital that night. I told her. I said, why can't you get her in rehab? She says she won't go. She's got capacity. And I argued with
Should have been sectioned though, shouldn't she? She should have been sectioned.
She should have been sectioned because I was told that once I got her through that door at Blackburn Royal, that they could keep her under the Dolls Act.
They can.
And he said nothing of the sort. I can't do that. He was the most strumpy doctor I've ever come across in my life. He was an absolute disgrace. I don't know his name. I wish I did.
Can I tell you something? Can I tell you something? Done this a long time. It's an honour to speak to somebody so honest, so straight. I can't even begin, as I'm sure viewers and listeners, to even understand the pain you went through. No, by the way, you're fundamentally wrong to place any blame on your shoulders. What you're highlighting is this grooming.
You don't realise it's going on till it's too late.
Mate,
Do you know what I mean?
I know, but
It's all these people, they trust the daughters.
You know me, Tony. You know me. I'm straight. It's so easy. For me, one of the worst things about a crime like this is that the people whose lives are blighted, they lose family members. They spend the rest of their living years questioning, wondering, thinking, pondering, fearing that they didn't do that. This isn't on you. This is on the systems. This is on grooming. And this is why we've been talking about this for the whole of this week, and we'll continue talking about it, which is that we seemingly have accepted as a society that we can make excuses for what is the most vile, repugnant, unacceptable behaviour. And I'm so pleased that you were able to do this. I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. We're going to support your affair. But I do know one thing, mate, and I'll tell you this, done this for a long time. Wherever she is, she'd be proud of you doing this. And what you've done today is maybe stopped a few people in their tracks who have gone, well, listen, this is real.
They all think it's kids out of care. They all think it's not they're rough, these girls, and that they're sort of, I won't say deserving of it, but that's what the image that people are getting. This is happening to everybody's daughters. You know, they're not. It's not a class conscience thing. I think it's a lack of respect throughout the Pakistani community on women in general. They're all inclusive. I think if you had more, if you went back to my day and age, your mum were always at home. Your mum was always the one that gave up work and always did the washing up and the washing and looked after the kids, and your dad never had out to do. And it seems like they're like sort of like back in my day and age, 60s, where that was the case. And I think they just need to respect women a bit more. And this, they'd probably, I don't know, probably change the culture a bit.
Mate, thank you. Genuinely, thank you. I hope that it. Listen, it's not cathartic for you, but I hope many people will be touched. And just before Tony goes, if you have been affected by anything with this story, because it is emotional, it is difficult, go to talk.tv/helplines, because that's really, really important. But sharing your story, Tony Sutton, has been so important, mate. We appreciate it. We're here for you, and I hope, in a little way, that helps. Convince people who don't believe, but I think mate, really honestly, I think there's a groundswell of opinion that ain't going anywhere in this country now, which is this is unacceptable and has to change now.
Before I've come on here, I've written to various MPs, and most of them don't even give you a reply. Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips, Keir Starmer.
Wow.
I'm trying to think who else. The one that said it was whistleblowing. I can't think what she was.
Lucy Powell.
I've wrote to a lot of these, and the only one, I've wrote to Lee Anderson, and in fairness to Lee Anderson, he got back to me and he said you're outside of my constituency. I can't get involved, Tony. But the other thing is, where I live, it's all Asian run MP, Asian run social services.
Who's your MP? Who's your MP?
I don't know.
I'm going to find out who your MP is, and I'm going to ring him. Tony,
well, I haven't got a clue, but
we'll find that out.
To me, it'd be like going to Bernard Matthews about the problem with the Turkish.
What town are you in?
Blackburn.
Blackburn
Yeah.
South, Blackburn North.
Lancashire.
Yeah, I know where.
Yeah.
Mate, thank you. Truly, really appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you. We'll support your affair, and as I said to everybody else, talk.tv/helplines.